The wind through the Colorado mountains in December of 1883 did not merely blow, it shrieked, it clawed, it hunted. Catherine Brennan pressed her gloved hands against the frosted window of the mail coach, watching the world outside dissolve into white fury. Snow fell so thick and fast that the bare branches of distant pines appeared and vanished like ghosts, there one moment and gone the next. The temperature inside the coach had dropped with each passing mile, her breath clouding the air in small, desperate puffs. "This is Silverstone," the driver shouted over the storm, his voice muffled by the wool scarf wrapped twice around his face. "I cannot take you further, miss. The horses will die if we stay out in this." Kate looked past him through the small opening between driver and passenger. She could see nothing, no buildings, no lights. Only the endless, swirling white that seemed to erase the very concept of civilization. "But I cannot see the town," she called back, hearing the edge of panic creeping into her voice. "How will I know where to go?" Straight ahead, about 60 yards. "There is a church with a bell tower. You cannot miss it. Just walk forward and you will find shelter." The driver did not wait for her protest. The door swung open and a wall of cold hit her like a physical blow. Before she could gather her thoughts, rough hands helped her down onto frozen ground. Her boots crunched through snow that came past her ankles, already soaking through the thin leather. Her trunk landed beside her with a heavy thud that sent up a spray of white powder. "Wait," she began, but the coach was already moving. The horses strained against their harnesses, their breath streaming like dragon smoke in the frigid air. Within seconds, the dark shape of the coach disappeared into the storm, swallowed whole by the blizzard. Kate stood alone. The reality of her situation settled over her like the ice forming on her eyelashes. She was 24 years old. She had traveled 2,000 miles from Philadelphia with $2.50 in her pocket, 3 dresses in her trunk, and a leather-bound ledger that had belonged to her father. Everything else, the house on Chestnut Street, the mahogany furniture, the silver service her mother had treasured, all of it was gone. Claimed by her Uncle George after her father's death, sold to pay gambling debts that had nothing to do with her. The ledger was all she had left of her father, William Brennan, that, and the skills he had taught her since she was 9 years old. How to read a balance sheet, how to spot fraud in a column of numbers, how to see the truth that most people missed because they did not know where to look. Those skills had not saved her father. They had not prevented the stroke that killed him when he discovered how deeply his partner had betrayed him. But perhaps, Kate thought as she gripped the trunk handle, they might save her now, if she lived long enough to use them. She began to drag the trunk forward, following what she hoped was a straight line toward the invisible church. The wind pushed against her like a living thing, shoving her backward 2 steps for every 3 she managed forward. Snow stung her face like thrown sand. Her fingers, even inside her gloves, began to lose sensation within minutes. This was different from Philadelphia winters. This was a cold that did not merely chill, it killed. After what felt like an eternity but was probably less than 5 minutes, her boot struck something solid. Wood. A wall. Relief flooded through her so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled. She released the trunk handle and felt along the wall, searching for a door, a window, any kind of entrance. The first door she found would not budge, locked or frozen shut or simply warped by years of mountain weather. She moved along the wall, her sense of direction already confused by the whiteout conditions. Was she moving away from shelter or toward it? She could no longer tell which way she had come from or which way led to safety. Her vision began to blur, not from snow in her eyes, but from something worse, the beginning of hypothermia. She recognized the signs from a medical text she had read years ago: confusion, lethargy, the dangerous desire to simply lie down and rest. She stumbled forward again, no longer pulling her trunk. Survival had narrowed to its most basic equation: keep moving or die. Her father had always said that numbers never lied. He had taught her to trust mathematics above all else, because numbers were pure truth in a world full of deception. But what were the numbers now? How many minutes until her core temperature dropped below the point of no return? How many more steps could she take before her legs simply refused to obey? The calculations were simple and terrible. She had perhaps 10 minutes left, maybe 15 if she was lucky. She was not feeling lucky. Kate's boot caught on something hidden beneath the snow. She pitched forward, hands outstretched to break her fall. The ledger, which she had been clutching against her chest, flew from her grip and disappeared into the white. No. The word came out as barely a whisper, stolen by the wind. She dropped to her hands and knees, frantically sweeping her arms through the snow, searching for the only thing she had left of her father. Her fingers, nearly numb now, brushed against leather. She grabbed the ledger and pulled it close, clutching it like a child with a beloved toy. Tears froze on her cheeks. She tried to stand, but her legs would not support her weight. The snow beneath her was soft, almost welcoming. It would be so easy to just lie down, just for a moment, just to rest. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Numbers never lie, Katie girl. When everything else fails you, trust the mathematics. The mathematics said she was going to die here, frozen, alone, in a town she could not even see. She closed her eyes. Then, through the howling wind, she heard something, a voice, deep and commanding and very much alive. Do not move, I am coming to you. Kate's eyes snapped open. She tried to call out, to make a sound that would guide him to her, but her jaw was shaking too violently to form words. She saw nothing but white. Then, like a figure emerging from fog, a shape materialized. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving through the storm as if the wind and snow were merely inconveniences rather than death sentences. He dropped to his knees beside her. Through her frozen lashes, she saw a face wrapped in dark wool, but his eyes were visible above the scarf. Blue eyes, intense and focused entirely on her. "Can you stand?" he asked. Kate tried to answer, tried to explain that her legs would not cooperate, but all that came out was a choked sound that might have been a sob or simply a failure of speech. The man did not wait for a response. He scooped her up in his arms, lifting her as easily as if she weighed no more than a child. One arm went behind her knees, the other behind her shoulders. He pulled her tight against his chest, and she felt, even through layers of wool and leather, the solid warmth of a living body. "I have got you," he said. "Stay with me now. We are almost there." Kate felt herself being carried through the storm. She clutched the ledger against her chest with what little strength remained in her arms. The man moved with purpose and certainty, his stride confident despite the conditions. Within moments, though she had lost all sense of time and distance, she heard a door open. The wind stopped. The sudden absence of that constant battering force was so profound that it felt like entering a different world. Warmth hit her face, painful after the extreme cold. She groaned, a sound she could not suppress, as feeling began to return to her extremities in sharp, needling waves. The man set her down on something soft, not a bed, but perhaps a cot or a pile of blankets. She blinked, trying to focus, trying to see where she was. The room swam in her vision. Wooden walls, a stove in the corner, its metal sides glowing with heat, tools hanging on pegs, not a house. A workshop of some kind. "Your coat is frozen solid," the man said, his voice calmer now but still commanding. "This is going to hurt." He was right. As he worked the stiff, ice-crusted fabric from her shoulders, pain shot through her arms and back. She cried out, unable to stop herself. The coat came free and he tossed it aside, then moved to her gloves. They had frozen to the wool of her coat sleeves, the leather stiff as wood. He pulled a knife from his belt and cut through the material. Her fingers were white and waxy when he exposed them to the air. She stared at her own hands and barely recognized them. The man wrapped them immediately in soft wool blankets, then moved to her boots. The laces had frozen into solid cords. Again, the knife. He cut through them with quick, practiced movements, then eased the boots off her feet with surprising gentleness. Her stockings were soaked through. He removed those too, his movements efficient and impersonal, like a doctor tending a patient. Throughout it all, he kept talking. His voice was steady and reassuring, anchoring her to consciousness when part of her wanted to simply slip away into the darkness at the edges of her vision. "You are going to be fine. Nothing looks frostbitten beyond saving. You were not out there quite long enough, thank God. Can you tell me your name?" "Catherine," she managed through chattering teeth. "Catherine Brennan. From Philadelphia." The man paused for just a moment in his work, his hands stilled on the blanket he had been wrapping around her feet. Then he resumed, tucking the fabric carefully around her. "Catherine Brennan," he repeated, and there was something in his voice she could not identify. Recognition, perhaps, or relief. "From Philadelphia." She blinked, trying to focus on his face. He had removed his own scarf, revealing strong features weathered by sun and wind. His hair was dark brown, almost black, with threads of silver at the temples. Those blue eyes seemed to see right through her. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with the kind of face that might have been handsome if it were not set in such serious lines. "How did you know?" she asked. "About Philadelphia." He stood and moved to the stove, where a kettle had begun to steam. He poured hot water into a thick ceramic mug, added something from a tin, and brought it back to her. When he spoke, his words were simple and direct, but they hit her like a physical blow. "Because I have been waiting for you. I am Nathaniel Morrison, your intended husband." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Kate stared at him, the mug warming her hands but doing nothing to chase away the sudden chill that had nothing to do with the blizzard. This was not how she had imagined it. When she had answered the advertisement 6 weeks ago, sitting in her uncle's house with eviction papers on the table beside her, she had pictured their first meeting very differently, perhaps in a parlor, perhaps over tea, somewhere civilized where they could assess each other from a polite distance, like two parties entering into a business contract. Not this, not her half-frozen and helpless, pulled from the jaws of death like a fool who had wandered into danger through her own stupidity. "The coach," she said, her voice still shaking. "They said they could not wait. I tried to find shelter." Morrison moved back to the stove and returned with a second mug for himself. He sat down on a stool near her, close enough to speak comfortably but far enough to be respectful. "The Mercantile is in the opposite direction from where you were heading. You got turned around in the whiteout. Lucky for you, I have been watching for that coach for 3 days now. When I saw it stop and leave you, I came running." "3 days?" Kate stared at him. "You have been watching for 3 days? In this storm? The storm has only been this bad since this morning. Before that, it was just heavy snow. I knew you were coming this week. I wanted to make sure you arrived safely." He said it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. As if spending 3 days watching for a mail coach in December weather was simply what a man did when he was expecting his mail-order bride. Kate took a sip of the drink he had given her. It was tea, strong and sweet, and it seemed to reach all the way down to her frozen core. As warmth began to spread through her body, she looked around the room more carefully. It was a forge. She realized that now, seeing the anvil in the corner, the bellows beside the stove, the racks of tools hanging with precise organization. Everything was clean and well-maintained, no clutter, no chaos. This was the workspace of a man who took care of what belonged to him. Animal hides covered the wooden floor. The walls were thick logs, chinked carefully against the wind that still howled outside. A rifle rested on pegs above the door, and on a shelf near the window, she saw something unexpected. Books. Not many, but more than she would have anticipated from a frontier blacksmith. "This is your forge?" she asked. "Yes. My cabin is behind this building, connected by a covered passage. I brought you here first because the forge was closer and still warm from the day's work." Once you have recovered a bit, we can move you to the cabin. It is more comfortable there." Kate nodded, still trying to process everything. Her mind, trained by years of accounting work, automatically began cataloging details. The forge was well equipped but showed signs of age. Some of the tools had been repaired multiple times. The building itself was solid but not new. This was not the workshop of a wealthy man. She glanced down at the ledger still clutched in her lap. The leather was damp but not soaked. She opened it carefully, and relief washed through her when she saw that the pages inside were dry, the careful columns of her father's handwriting still legible. Morrison followed her gaze. "Is that important to you?" "It was my father's," she said quietly. "It is all I have left of him." Morrison nodded slowly, as if he understood more than she had said. He stood and moved to a cabinet on the far wall, pulled out a clean cloth, and brought it back to her. "Dry it carefully. Even damp leather can mold if you are not careful in this climate." The gesture, small as it was, touched something in Kate that she had not expected. This man, this stranger who was somehow her husband, or would be soon, had just pulled her from certain death. And now he was worried about her father's ledger. She took the cloth and began gently blotting the leather cover. As she worked, Morrison retrieved her trunk from outside, brushing snow from its surface before bringing it inside. He set it near the stove where the heat would help dry it, but not close enough to damage the contents. "I know this is not the meeting you expected, Miss Brennan," he said, settling back onto his stool. "I apologize for the circumstances." "You saved my life," Kate said, looking up at him. "I think that makes up for any breach of etiquette." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was the first softening of those stern features she had seen, and it changed his face entirely. For a moment she caught a glimpse of the man he might be beneath the serious exterior. "I am glad I was there. When I saw that coach leave and realized they had actually abandoned you in that whiteout, I was not sure I would reach you in time." "Why did they do that? Why not wait, or take me to the next town? They were afraid the horses would freeze. They might have been right." "This storm is worse than anything I have seen in my years here. It is unusual for this part of Colorado." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. His blue eyes held hers steadily. "Miss Brennan, I realize this situation is highly irregular. You and I are unchaperoned, alone in this forge. I want you to know that you are completely safe with me. I will sleep in the cabin tonight, and you can rest here where it is warm. Tomorrow, when the storm passes, we can discuss arrangements. If you wish to proceed with the marriage, we can go to Reverend Lucas. If you do not, I will give you money to return east or go anywhere else you choose." The formal speech was oddly touching, a reminder that despite the desperate circumstances, he was trying to be a gentleman. Kate looked at him, really looked at him, and tried to imagine this man as her husband. His letters had been brief and practical. He had described himself as a blacksmith and small rancher, 32 years old, widowed 4 years prior. He needed a wife to help build a life. He promised to provide and protect. The letters had been honest, but not warm. There had been no poetry, no romance, just straightforward facts. But now, facing the reality of Nathaniel Morrison in person, she felt something unexpected. Not fear, which would have been reasonable, not even uncertainty, but a strange kind of curiosity. There was something in the way he looked at her, an intensity that suggested she was not simply a convenience, a solution to his need for a wife. "You said you have been waiting for me," Kate said softly. "When you first told me your name, you said you have been waiting. What did you mean?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment. He seemed to be choosing his words with care. When he spoke, his voice was lower, more personal than it had been. "I have been alone a long time, Miss Brennan. 4 years since Anna died. 4 years of working this forge and tending my horses and living in that cabin with only my own thoughts for company. I am good at what I do. I have made a decent life for myself, but a life is not just about surviving, about having shelter and food. At least, it should not be." He paused, his gaze drifting to the glowing stove before returning to her face. When I decided to seek a wife through correspondence, I read many letters from many women. Yours stood out. Why? Because you did not try to pretend. You told me straight that you had no other prospects, that your family's money was gone, that you were looking for security. But you also told me about the books you loved, about your father's work, about how you understood numbers the way some people understand music. You wrote like someone who had lived, not just existed, like someone who could understand that sometimes the best things come from the hardest choices. Kate felt warmth creep into her cheeks that had nothing to do with the tea or the stove. She had agonized over that letter, written it 3 times before finally posting it. She had worried that she had been too honest, too plain, that she should have tried to make herself sound more alluring, more mysterious. I thought perhaps I had been too honest, she admitted, that I should have been more careful about what I revealed. Morrison shook his head. Mystery fades, honesty lasts. I wanted someone real, someone who could build a life with me as a partner, not just as a decoration or a servant. I wanted someone who might, in time, come to care for this place and this life the way I do. He set down his mug and leaned back, his expression serious again. And I thought that perhaps, if I was fortunate, you might be someone I could come to love. Not immediately, not even quickly. But eventually, if we both chose to try. The word love hung in the air between them, unexpected and profound. Kate had not allowed herself to think about love. This was a practical arrangement, an escape from destitution. Love was a luxury she could not afford to hope for. But hearing this quiet blacksmith speak of it so directly, so honestly, something shifted inside her chest. A loosening of the tight bands of fear and grief that had constricted her heart since her father's death. "Do you think I can do that?" she asked quietly. "Care for this life? I know nothing about Colorado or forges or ranching. I am a city girl from Philadelphia. Everything I know comes from ledgers and books." Morrison looked at her steadily. "I think you survived losing everything you knew. You traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger. You just fought through a blizzard with more courage than most men I know. Yes, Miss Brennan, I think you can do just about anything you set your mind to." The compliment, so unexpected and so genuinely meant, made Kate's throat tighten. She blinked back tears, not wanting to appear weak, but one escaped and rolled down her cheek. Morrison saw it. Something in his expression softened even further. "It is all right to be overwhelmed. You have been through a lot today. Why do not you rest now? There is time enough to talk more when you have recovered." Kate wanted to protest, to say she was fine, but exhaustion was crashing over her in waves now that the immediate danger had passed. The warmth of the forge, the sweet tea, the safety of these 4 walls, all of it combined to make her eyelids impossibly heavy. "I do not want to take your bed," she murmured, even as she felt herself sinking back against the blankets. "You are not taking anything. I am giving it to you. Now rest." He stood and moved to bank the fire in the stove, adjusting the damper to keep the heat steady through the night without wasting fuel. Kate watched him through half-closed eyes, noting the practiced ease of his movements. This was a man who knew how to take care of himself, how to survive in this harsh place. Perhaps, she thought in that hazy moment before sleep claimed her, he could teach her to survive here, too. When Kate woke, gray light was seeping through the single window of the forge. For a moment she did not know where she was. Then memory returned in a rush. The blizzard, the near death in the snow. Nathaniel Morrison's blue eyes looking down at her. She sat up slowly. Her body protested, every muscle aching as if she had been beaten. But it was the ache of strain, not the numbness of freezing. She flexed her fingers and toes, relief flooding through her when they all responded. She had been lucky, remarkably, impossibly lucky. The stove still radiated warmth, though the fire had burned down to embers. On the small table beside her improvised bed, Someone had left a plate with bread, cheese, and an apple. A cup of water sat beside it. Kate realized she was ravenous. She could not remember the last time she had eaten. Yesterday morning, perhaps, before the coach had departed from the last town. She ate quickly, almost forgetting her manners in her hunger. The bread was plain but fresh, the cheese sharp and good. As she ate, she looked around the forge more carefully in the daylight. It was larger than she had realized last night. The main work area dominated the center of the space, with the anvil positioned to catch light from the window. Racks of tools lined one wall, everything from hammers to tongs to files, all hung with precise organization. A grinding wheel sat in one corner. Beside it, a workbench covered with smaller projects. Horseshoes, nails, hinges, the everyday items that kept a frontier town functioning. But on a shelf above the bench, she saw something else. Decorative pieces, a pair of candlesticks with elegant curves, and a door handle shaped like a vine. These were not purely functional items. These showed artistry. Kate stood, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, and moved closer to examine them. The metalwork was beautiful, the kind of thing she had seen in Philadelphia shops, not frontier forges. Whoever had made these had real skill, not just competence. "You are awake." Kate turned to find Morrison standing in the doorway that led to the covered passage. He wore a different shirt than last night. This one, a dark blue wool that brought out the color of his eyes. His hair was damp, as if he had washed in cold water. "I hope you are feeling better," he said. "Much better. Thank you. For the food. For saving my life. For everything." Morrison nodded and moved to the stove, adding wood to rebuild the fire. "You gave us a scare. Another 10 minutes, and I might not have found you." Kate shuddered, remembering the cold, the confusion, the terrible desire to simply lie down in the snow. "I thought I was going to die." The mathematics of it were very clear. Morrison glanced at her, one eyebrow raised slightly. "Mathematics?" Kate gestured vaguely, embarrassed. "My father taught me to think in numbers, time, temperature, distance. I was calculating how long I could survive. The equation was not favorable." A small smile tugged at Morrison's mouth. "Well, sometimes the best outcomes are the ones that defy calculation." He finished with the stove and turned to face her fully. "The storm has passed. The sky is clear today. If you are feeling strong enough, we could go to Reverend Lucas. Or if you prefer, we could wait. There is no rush." Kate looked down at her hands, at the simple blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Everything she owned in the world was in the trunk beside the forge. 3 dresses, a few undergarments, the ledger, and $2.50. She had no money to return east, no family to take her in, even if she could afford the journey. Her Uncle George had made it clear that she was no longer welcome in his house. The moment her father had died, she had become a burden he was eager to be rid of. But it was not desperation that made her decision, not entirely. There was something about Nathaniel Morrison that she had not expected. A quiet strength, a gentleness beneath the weathered exterior, and, perhaps most importantly, an honesty that felt rare and precious. "I would like to proceed," she said, meeting his eyes. "If the offer still stands." "It stands," Morrison said. "It will always stand, as long as you want it. Then yes, let us go to Reverend Lucas." Morrison nodded slowly, as if he had been holding his breath, and just now allowed himself to exhale. "Good. That is good. But first, we should see about getting you properly dressed. Your clothes from yesterday are still damp. Do you have something else in your trunk?" Kate moved to the trunk and opened it, grateful to find that the contents were dry. She pulled out her best dress, a navy blue wool with modest sleeves and a high collar. It had been her mother's once, altered to fit Kate's smaller frame. It was old-fashioned now, but it was well made and still fit perfectly. Morrison turned his back, giving her privacy. Kate dressed quickly, her fingers still clumsy from yesterday's ordeal. She had no mirror large enough to see her full reflection, but she braided her hair carefully and pinned it up as best she could. When she turned back, Morrison was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "You look lovely," he said simply. "That color suits you." The compliment, delivered without flourish or exaggeration, was somehow more meaningful than any flowery praise. Kate felt her cheeks warm. "It was my mother's. I wanted to wear something that connected me to her today. She died when I was 16. Morrison's expression softened with understanding. "She would have been proud of you. For your courage, for your strength. I am sorry she cannot be here." "Thank you," Kate said quietly. "That means more than you know." Morrison moved to his own trunk in the corner and pulled out a black suit. It was worn but clean, clearly his best clothing. He changed quickly and efficiently, then retrieved 2 heavy coats from hooks near the door. "It is cold out, but not dangerous like yesterday. The horses are ready. It is about a 20-minute ride to the church." Kate had not ridden a horse since she was a child. Philadelphia had streetcars and carriages. But she nodded, refusing to show fear. She had survived a blizzard. She could manage a horse. Morrison led her through the covered passage to a cabin that was indeed more comfortable than the forge. A single room, but spacious and well organized. A bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with provisions, and more books. Everything spoke of a man who lived alone, but lived with care and order. Beyond the cabin was a small stable. 2 horses stood in stalls, already saddled. One was a large bay gelding, clearly Morrison's mount. The other was a smaller mare, gray with a white blaze. "This is Willow," Morrison said, stroking the mare's neck. "She is the calmest horse I own. She will take care of you." He helped Kate mount, his hand steady on her waist as he lifted her into the saddle. The contact was brief, but Kate felt the strength in his grip, the easy way he supported her weight. When he mounted his own horse, the movement was fluid and practiced. This was a man completely comfortable with animals. They rode out into a world transformed. Yesterday's fury had given way to brilliant sunshine and deep blue sky. Snow blanketed everything, pristine and blinding white. The town of Silverstone, such as it was, lay ahead of them. Kate could see it clearly now, perhaps 20 buildings clustered along a single main street. Half of them appeared to be abandoned, their windows dark and lifeless. "Is the town dying?" Kate asked. Morrison's jaw tightened. Slowly. "The silver mine that founded this place played out 5 years ago. Since then, people have been leaving. We are down to maybe 80 souls now. Used to be 300. And you stayed? This is my home. I built the forge with my own hands. Anna is buried here. I will not abandon her." The words were simple, but Kate heard the weight behind them. This was a man who did not break his promises, even to the dead. They rode in silence for a few minutes. Then Morrison spoke again, his tone carefully neutral. "I want you to know something, Miss Brennan. Before we go to Reverend Lucas, I have debts." Kate turned to look at him. "What kind of debts?" "The forge owes $400 to the bank. Virgil Pemberton owns the bank, and he has given me until the end of this month to pay. If I cannot, he will take the forge." Kate felt her stomach drop. "How much time do you have?" "Today is December 20th. I have 11 days. "And how much do you currently have saved?" Morrison's expression was grim. $73. "I have been trying to collect on debts owed to me, but most people in Silverstone are struggling themselves. Money is scarce." Kate's mind, trained by years of working alongside her father, immediately began processing the information. $400, 11 days, $73 in hand. The mathematics were not favorable, but unlike yesterday's life or death calculation, this was a problem that could potentially be solved. Numbers never lied. But numbers could also be manipulated, arranged, optimized. That was what her father had taught her. That was what she knew how to do. "How much are you owed in outstanding debts?" she asked. Morrison glanced at her, surprised by the question. "I am not certain exactly, perhaps $200 spread across a dozen people." "Do you have records? A ledger?" I have receipts and notes, nothing organized. Kate felt something shift inside her. A familiar stirring, the same feeling she had gotten as a girl when her father would show her a complex set of accounts and ask her to find the pattern hidden in the numbers. "When we return from the church," she said, "I would like to see those receipts." Morrison reined his horse to a stop. Kate pulled up beside him. He was staring at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Why would you want to do that?" "Because," Kate said, meeting his gaze steadily, "if we are going to be married, your debts become my debts, your problems become my problems. And I am very good with numbers, Mr. Morrison, perhaps better than you realize." A slow smile spread across Morrison's face. It transformed him completely, erasing years from his weathered features. For the first time, Kate saw the man he must have been before grief and loneliness had carved their marks. "Then perhaps, Miss Brennan, we should not keep Reverend Lucas waiting any longer." They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before, comfortable, almost companionable, as if they had reached some unspoken understanding. The church sat at the edge of town, a simple white structure with a wooden cross above the door. Smoke rose from a chimney, promising warmth inside. Morrison helped Kate dismount, his hands once again steady and sure on her waist. This time, when she looked up at him, she saw something in his eyes that had not been there before: hope. They walked to the church door together. Morrison knocked, and they waited in the cold sunshine, their breath misting in the clear air. Kate could hear voices inside, then footsteps approaching. The door opened to reveal an elderly man with white hair and kind eyes. He wore simple black clothing, and his face creased into a welcoming smile when he saw them. "Nathaniel," he said warmly, "I was wondering when you would come. I heard the mail coach arrived yesterday despite the storm." "It did, Reverend Lucas," Morrison said, "and nearly killed its passenger in the process. This is Miss Catherine Brennan from Philadelphia." The Reverend took Kate's hand gently. "Welcome to Silverstone, my dear. I am pleased to see you arrived safely, though I understand it was a near thing." "Very near," Kate agreed. "If Mr. Morrison had not been watching for the coach, I do not know what would have happened." "But he was watching," the Reverend said, his eyes twinkling. "Because that is who he is, a responsible man, a good man. You are fortunate, Miss Brennan. Please call me Catherine, or Kate. And I am beginning to realize how fortunate I am." The Reverend smiled and stepped back, gesturing them inside. "Now, I understand you wish to be married today, if that is possible," Morrison said. Of course. We will need witnesses. Let me send my grandson to fetch a couple of neighbors." He disappeared into a back room, and they heard him calling. Morrison and Kate were left alone in the quiet church. It was simple inside, with plain wooden pews and a modest altar. A wood stove in the corner provided warmth. Everything was clean and well-maintained, speaking of a community that might be small, but still cared for its sacred spaces. "Are you all right?" Morrison asked quietly. Kate looked around at the simple pews, the plain altar, the wooden cross on the wall. It was nothing like the grand church in Philadelphia where she had once imagined she might marry. But there was something honest about this place, something real. "I am," she said. "Surprisingly, I am." Within minutes, 2 women arrived, bundled against the cold and full of curiosity. They introduced themselves as Ruth Cooper, the boarding house owner, and Clara Hayes, a miner's wife. Both were friendly, assessing Kate with interested eyes. "So you are the mail-order bride," Ruth said. She was older, perhaps 55, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Brave of you to come all this way." "Or desperate," Kate said honestly. Both women laughed. "We like honesty," Clara said. She was younger, closer to Kate's age, with red hair and a ready smile. "You will fit in fine here. This is not a place for airs and pretense." Reverend Lucas returned, now wearing his ministerial robes. He took his place before the altar and gestured for Kate and Morrison to stand before him. They did so, facing each other. Morrison's hands were steady as he took Kate's, but she could feel the calluses on his palms, the strength in his grip. These were working hands, hands that created things and built things and saved lives in blizzards. The Reverend began the familiar words of the marriage ceremony. Kate found herself listening to them truly, perhaps for the first time in her life. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. These were not just traditions. They were promises, real and binding. When Reverend Lucas asked Morrison to repeat his vows, his voice was steady and clear. He looked directly into Kate's eyes as he spoke. I, Nathaniel Morrison, take you, Catherine Brennan, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part. The words sent a shiver through Kate, not fear, something warmer, something that felt dangerously close to hope. When it was her turn, she kept her eyes on his, speaking clearly despite the emotion threatening to choke her. I, Catherine Brennan, take you, Nathaniel Morrison, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part. Morrison produced a simple silver band. It was plain, unadorned, but beautifully crafted. He slid it onto her finger, and Kate saw that it fit perfectly. I made it myself, he said quietly. I had to guess at the size. It is perfect, Kate whispered. You may kiss your bride, Reverend Lucas said, beaming. Morrison hesitated for just a moment. Then he cupped Kate's face gently in his calloused hands and kissed her. It was soft and careful, a first kiss that promised patience. When they parted, Kate felt something bloom in her chest, something warm and unexpected. Congratulations, the Reverend said. May you have many happy years together. Ruth and Clara embraced Kate, welcoming her to the community. You must come visit once you are settled, Ruth said. I want to hear all about Philadelphia. We do not get much news from back east. I would like that very much, Kate said. They signed the necessary papers, making everything legal and binding. Catherine Brennan was now Catherine Morrison, a married woman, a blacksmith's wife in a dying Colorado town. As they rode back toward the forge, Morrison reached over and took her hand. They rode like that for a while, gloved hands linked between their horses. When the path narrowed and they had to separate, Kate found herself missing the contact. Back at the cabin, Morrison started to build up the fire, while Kate removed her coat. The day had warmed slightly, though it was still cold enough that their breath misted inside until the stove began radiating heat. Kate turned to face her husband. The word felt strange even in her thoughts. Husband. She had a husband now. This quiet man with his sad eyes and gentle hands was legally bound to her for the rest of their lives. Before you say anything about sleeping arrangements, Kate said. Morrison looked up, startled. I have something to say. All right, we are married now, properly married, and while I appreciate your respect and your desire not to pressure me, I think we should be practical about this. We share this cabin. We share this life. There is no sense in pretending otherwise. Morrison stood slowly. What are you saying? I am saying that I am not afraid of you, and I do not want you sleeping on the floor or in the forge. We are husband and wife now. We should share that bed. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. If that is what you want. It is. But first, Kate moved to her trunk and pulled out her father's ledger. I would like to see those receipts you mentioned. All of them. Every debt owed to you, every expense, every transaction for the past year. Can you gather them for me? Morrison's expression shifted from uncertainty to something that might have been relief, or perhaps recognition, as if he was beginning to understand who Catherine Morrison truly was. I can do that, he said. Give me a few minutes. He moved to a cabinet and began pulling out papers, handfuls of receipts and notes and scraps with figures scrawled on them. He brought them to the table and Kate sat down, opening her father's ledger to a blank page. As she began to sort through the papers, Morrison sat across from her, watching in silence. Kate worked methodically, creating columns, organizing the chaos into patterns she could read and understand. Numbers never lied, and these numbers were telling her a story of a good man who was too kind to demand payment, a story of a community struggling to survive. But also, hidden in the columns, a story of possibility. After an hour of work, Kate looked up. Her eyes met Morrison's across the table. "I can fix this," she said quietly. "I do not know if I can save us completely, but I can fix enough of this that we have a fighting chance." Morrison leaned forward. "How?" Kate turned the ledger around so he could see her neat columns. But before she could explain, Morrison reached across the table and took her hand. "Thank you," he said simply, "for staying, for trying, for being here." Kate squeezed his hand back. She was not sure what tomorrow would bring. She was not sure if they could solve the problem of the debt in just 11 days. But for the first time since her father's death, she felt like she had purpose again. She had numbers to work with, problems to solve, and a partner, perhaps, who valued what she could do. It was not love, not yet, but it was something. And sometimes, Kate thought, as she looked at her new husband's hopeful face, something was enough to build on. The morning after their wedding, Kate woke to find Morrison already gone from the bed they had shared. They had lain beside each other in the darkness, careful not to touch, both acutely aware of the presence beside them. Kate had listened to his breathing until sleep finally claimed her. Now she could hear the forge coming to life beyond the cabin walls. The clang of hammer on anvil, the whoosh of bellows feeding air to hungry flames. She dressed quickly and braided her hair, then followed the sounds through the covered passage. Morrison stood at his anvil, working a piece of iron that glowed like a small sun. His sleeves were rolled despite the December cold, revealing forearms that moved with practiced precision. Each strike of the hammer was purposeful, shaping metal through a combination of heat and force and patience. He looked up when she entered. "There is coffee on the stove." Kate poured herself a cup, trying not to grimace at the bitter taste. She sat at the workbench where her father's ledger lay open, columns of figures visible in the firelight. She had worked until midnight, organizing Morrison's chaos of receipts into something she could understand. Morrison finished the piece he was working on and plunged it into water. Steam hissed, and the forge filled with the sharp smell of hot metal meeting cold. He wiped his hands and came to stand beside her. "What did you find?" Kate traced her finger down the neat columns. "You are owed $290 across 12 customers, but Samuel Garrett at the general store owes you $85 for metalwork. He cannot pay because 8 customers owe him $120 they have not paid. Thomas Crane owes you $60. Clara Hayes' husband owes $40. Everyone owes everyone, so no one has cash to settle accounts." "Exactly. But here is what matters." Kate turned the ledger so he could see. "If you look at the full chain of debts, most of it cancels out. Garrett owes you $85, but you bought $30 of supplies from him. Your net claim is $55. Crane owes you $60, but you bought $20 of hay. Net is $40. Across the entire town, if everyone agrees to offset their mutual debts, the actual cash needed is much smaller than the total amount owed." Morrison leaned closer, studying the figures with new understanding. "I never thought to look at it that way. Most people do not. They see debts as separate obligations, but they are connected. If we can organize everyone to settle their accounts against each other, we can clear most of the outstanding balance without anyone producing hard currency." "And you think the town will agree to this?" Kate met his eyes. "The alternative is watching Silverstone die. If your forge closes, how many more families will leave?" Morrison's jaw tightened. "I am the only metalsmith for 40 miles. Without me, broken equipment stays broken. Horses go unshod. People leave or starve. Then we are not asking for charity. We are offering survival. You have been here 2 days and you see what I missed for 4 years. Kate smiled slightly. My father used to say, the hardest problems are the ones you live with every day. You stop seeing them clearly. Morrison returned to his work, but Kate could see the tension in his shoulders had eased slightly. She had given him something he had lost, not just a plan, but hope. When do we start? He asked without looking up from the anvil. Today. I will need to borrow Willow. She is yours now. Everything I have is yours. The words were casual, but they carried weight. Kate gathered her coat and the ledger and rode through cold morning air to Ruth Cooper's boarding house. It was a solid 2-story structure with clean windows and smoke rising from dual chimneys. Ruth answered the door with flour on her hands and surprise on her face. Mrs. Morrison, I did not expect to see you the morning after your wedding. I need to speak with you about business. Ruth's eyebrows rose, but she stepped aside. Come in then. Coffee is fresh. The boarding house parlor was warm and well kept. Ruth poured coffee into chipped but clean cups and sat across from Kate with the directness of a woman who had no patience for pretense. What business brings a bride to my door before breakfast? Kate opened the ledger. The town is dying. You know it. I know it. Nathaniel's forge owes $400 to Pemberton's bank by month's end. If he cannot pay, the bank takes the forge. If the forge closes, how many more families leave? Ruth's expression hardened. Pemberton. That man would foreclose on his own mother if there was profit in it. Perhaps. But his terms are legal, so we have to find another way. Kate turned the ledger around. According to Nathaniel's records, the town owes him $290 total, but he owes money back to many of the same people. Everyone is waiting for everyone else to pay first. Meanwhile, Pemberton's deadline approaches, and no one has cash. Ruth studied the columns with the eye of someone who understood ledgers. So you want to organize a settlement. Everyone forgives part of their debts to unlock the money that is already there. Not forgives, offsets. If Garrett owes Nathaniel $85, but Nathaniel owes Garrett $30, the net debt is $55. If we do this across all accounts, the actual currency needed drops significantly. And what if people refuse? What if they want full payment? Kate leaned forward. Then they get nothing. Because if Nathaniel loses the forge, there will be no one to collect from, and the town loses its only blacksmith. Tell me, Mrs. Cooper, how long does Silverstone last without metalworks? Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Her fingers drummed against the table. Finally, she spoke. You are either very brave or very stupid, Mrs. Morrison. I have been called both, usually by the same people. Ruth's stern expression cracked into something that might have been a smile. What do you need from me? Help me gather the major creditors. If I can show them the numbers, show them how this benefits everyone, they might listen. But they will listen better if Ruth Cooper stands beside me. Ruth stood and moved to the window. Outside, Silverstone stretched along its single main street. Half the buildings were dark and empty. What was once a thriving mining town was slowly becoming a ghost. My husband built this town, Ruth said quietly. Not the mine owners, not the banks. Thomas Cooper and men like him. They came here with nothing and built something from dirt and hope. When he died 5 years ago, I promised him I would not let it all turn to dust. She turned back to Kate. You have yourself a partner, Mrs. Morrison. But if this fails, Pemberton will have both our heads. If this fails, we will already be ruined. At least this way we go down fighting. Ruth actually smiled at that. Meet me at the church tonight, 7 o'clock. I will have the others there. Kate rode back to the forge with her heart pounding. She had committed them now. There was no turning back. She found Morrison shoeing a horse for Thomas Crane, the rancher who had witnessed their wedding. Crane was a big man with weathered features and shrewd eyes. He watched Kate approach with interest. Mrs. Morrison, congratulations again on your marriage. Thank you, Mr. Crane. Kate dismounted and stood beside Willow, one hand on the mare's warm neck. "I am glad you are here. I wanted to speak with you about a proposal." Crane's eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of proposal?" "The kind that might save this town." "There is a meeting tonight at the church, 7 o'clock. I would appreciate it if you attended. What is this meeting about?" "Debts, and how to settle them before we all go under." Crane glanced at Morrison, who was filing down the last hoof with careful attention. "Your husband putting you up to this?" "My husband is busy keeping his forge running. This is my idea." Crane studied her with new respect. "You have brass, I will give you that." "All right, I will be there, but I make no promises about what I will agree to. I am not asking for promises, just an open mind." After Crane left, Morrison straightened from his work and looked at Kate. "How did it go with Ruth?" "She is with us, and she is gathering others for a meeting tonight." Morrison set down his tools and came to stand in front of her. "Kate, if this does not work, if they refuse, Pemberton will take the forge in 10 days. We will have nothing." Kate reached out and took his hand. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact between them. His hand was warm and rough with calluses, the hand of a man who worked with fire and iron. "Then we will have nothing together." "But I do not believe it will come to that. Why are you doing this? You could take what little money I have and go back east, start over somewhere else." Morrison's blue eyes were searching hers, looking for something. Kate squeezed his hand. "Because you saved my life in that blizzard, now I am trying to save yours." That evening the church was fuller than it had been for their wedding. Ruth Cooper had done her work well. 15 people sat in the pews, representing most of Silverstone's remaining business owners. Samuel Garrett from the general store, Clara Hayes and her minor husband, Thomas Crane. Others Kate did not yet know. And in the back row, watching with cold calculation, sat Virgil Pemberton. Kate had not expected the banker to attend. His presence changed everything. Now this was not just a town meeting. It was a negotiation under the eyes of their adversary. Ruth stood at the front beside Kate, lending her authority to the proceedings. Reverend Lucas had offered the church space but wisely stayed out of the business discussion. Kate opened her father's ledger and faced the assembled townspeople. Her hands were steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs. "Thank you for coming. I know some of you are wondering who I am to call this meeting. I have been in Silverstone less than 3 days. But sometimes fresh eyes see what familiarity has obscured." She held up the ledger. "My husband's forge owes the bank $400 by December 31st. He cannot pay because the town owes him $290 that has not been collected. He has not collected because most of you cannot pay your debts because your customers have not paid you. We are all waiting for someone else to pay first. Meanwhile, time runs out." Samuel Garrett stood. "With respect, Mrs. Morrison, we all know the situation. Knowing it and solving it are different things." "Agreed. That is why I am proposing a solution." Kate moved to a chalkboard that Reverend Lucas had provided. She began writing figures. "Mr. Garrett, you owe my husband $85 for metalwork over the past year, correct?" Garrett shifted uncomfortably. "That sounds about right." "But my husband owes you $30 for supplies from your store. So the net debt is $55. If you agree to forgive the $30 you are owed in exchange for reducing what you owe to $55, you save $30 and clear your conscience. That only works if Nathaniel agrees to forgive what I owe him." Kate turned to Morrison, who sat in the front pew. He stood slowly. "I agree." A murmur ran through the church. Kate continued writing figures on the board, showing the interconnected web of debts. "Mr. Crane, you owe $60, but my husband owes you $20 for hay. Net debt $40. Mrs. Hayes, your husband owes $40, but purchased tools from Garrett, who owes us. If we all agree to offset our mutual obligations, the total amount of hard currency needed drops from over $500 total town debt to less than $200. "And where does the $200 come from?" Garrett asked. Kate had been waiting for this question. From the same place any town finds capital. We pool resources. Each business contributes what it can. Not full payment, but partial payment based on ability. The ranchers, who still have cash from fall cattle sales. The boarding house, which still has some income. Even small amounts add up. Thomas Crane spoke up. You are asking us to trust each other. That is hard in times like these. I am asking you to trust mathematics. Numbers do not lie. The money is here, locked up in reciprocal debts. We just need to release it. Virgil Pemberton stood. His voice cut through the room like a blade. This is all very creative, Mrs. Morrison, but the bank does not deal in creative accounting. We deal in dollars, real currency. If your husband cannot produce $400 by month's end, the forge becomes bank property. That is the contract he signed. Kate turned to face him. She had known this confrontation was coming. Mr. Pemberton, if you take the forge, how much do you think you can sell it for in a dying town? Pemberton's eyes narrowed. That is not your concern. I think it is. Because if the forge closes, at least a dozen families will leave Silverstone. That means empty houses, unpaid mortgages, uncollected loans. Your bank holds paper on most of this town. If Silverstone dies, how much of that paper becomes worthless? The banker's face remained expressionless, but Kate saw his jaw tighten. You are suggesting I forgive a legal debt to protect theoretical future income. I am suggesting you accept reality. You can take the forge and lose $1,000 in other defaulted loans, or you can work with us and keep a functioning town that eventually repays everything. The church was silent. Every eye moved between Kate and Pemberton like spectators at a prize fight. Finally, Pemberton spoke. What exactly are you proposing? Kate took a breath. If the town can raise $350 in hard currency by December 30th, will you accept that as payment in full? Consider the $50 discount an investment in keeping Silverstone alive. Pemberton was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, $350, in hand. By December 30th at noon, not a day later, not a dollar short. And if you fail, the forge is mine, and I will foreclose on any property that assisted this scheme. It was a threat, and everyone in the room heard it, but it was also a concession, small as it was. Kate extended her hand. Do we have an agreement? Pemberton looked at her hand as if it were a snake. Then, with visible reluctance, he shook it once. You have until December 30th. After he left, the room erupted in conversation. Some people were excited, seeing hope for the first time in months. Others were skeptical, doubting that $350 could be raised in 10 days. Ruth Cooper stood, and her voice cut through the chaos. I will contribute $50. Thomas? Crane stood slowly. 50 from me as well. Samuel Garrett was next. I can manage 20. And I will reduce prices on essentials for anyone who contributes. One by one, commitments came. Not everyone could contribute cash, but some offered goods or labor. By the time the meeting ended, they had pledges totaling $180, less than half what they needed. Kate walked back to the forge beside Morrison under a sky brilliant with stars. The cold bit at her face, but she barely felt it. Her mind was racing through calculations. We are short, Morrison said quietly. We have 10 days. I have one more idea, but you may not like it. Tell me. Kate stopped walking and turned to face him. The iron roses, the decorative pieces you made that are sitting on your shelf. How long would it take you to make 30 of them? Morrison looked confused. A week if I work day and night? But why would I make roses when I need to be doing paying work? Because we can sell them. $3 each. $90 total. Morrison stared at her. Kate, no one here buys decorative metalwork. They need plows and horseshoes and hinges. Practical things, not here. But Valentine's Day is 6 weeks away. Men everywhere need gifts for wives and sweethearts. A flower made of iron that will never wilt. Something that lasts forever, like love should. Understanding dawned in Morrison's eyes. You want to take orders now. Pre-sell them. Exactly. We tell men in Silverstone and the surrounding ranches that for $3 they can give their wives something no one else has, something handmade and permanent. We just need to sell the idea. And who is going to do the selling? I am not exactly a salesman. Kate smiled. Leave that to me. Over the next 5 days, Kate rode Willow to every ranch and homestead within 20 miles. She carried one of Morrison's iron roses as a sample, its metal petals crafted with such delicate precision that it looked almost real, despite being forged from iron. The pitch was simple. Your wife works hard. She sacrifices for your family. For $3, you can give her something beautiful that tells her she matters. Something that will never fade or die. Something she can pass to your daughter someday. Some men laughed at her. A few were hostile, suggesting that a woman 3 days in Silverstone had no business telling them how to treat their wives. But many listened, and of those who listened, more than half bought. Thomas Crane bought 2, Samuel Garrett bought 1. Even some of the miners, men who barely scraped by, found $3 for an iron rose. Kate kept meticulous records in her father's ledger. Each sale, each commitment, each dollar counted and accounted for. The numbers grew slowly but steadily. Meanwhile, Morrison worked in the forge from before dawn until after midnight. Kate would wake in the darkness to the sound of hammer on anvil, the rhythm steady as a heartbeat. She would rise and bring him coffee, watching as he shaped iron into impossible beauty. One night near midnight on December 28th, Kate stood in the forge doorway watching him work. He had not noticed her arrival, focused completely on the rose taking shape beneath his hammer. His face was streaked with soot and sweat. His movements were slower than they had been days ago, exhaustion evident in every gesture. But still, he worked. Kate felt something catch in her throat. This man who had saved her from the blizzard was now working himself to exhaustion, trying to save them both. And she had asked him to do it. She had pushed this plan that required him to forge beauty while his world was collapsing. Morrison finally looked up and saw her. His hand stilled. You should be sleeping. So should you. He set down his hammer and wiped his face with a cloth. 28 roses complete. 2 more to go. Kate moved closer. They looked like miracles. Morrison picked up one of the finished pieces, turning it so firelight caught the curves of petals and thorns. He had spent hours on each one, making sure every detail was perfect. These were not just metalwork. They were art. I used to make these for Anna, he said quietly. She loved roses, but they do not grow well here. Too cold, too dry. So I made her one from iron. She kept it on our kitchen table. Kate's heart clenched. Where is it now? Morrison set down the rose he was holding, buried with her. I could not stand to look at it after she died. I am sorry. I did not know that when I suggested this. If it is too painful, we can find another way. Morrison looked at her, and his eyes were bright in the firelight. Not painful. Not the way you think. Making these again, it feels like I am remembering her without the weight of grief. Like I am honoring what we had, instead of just mourning what I lost. He picked up another rose and held it out to Kate. This one is yours, the first one I made for this project, before we even knew if anyone would buy them. Kate took it carefully. The metal was smooth and cool in her hands. She could see where Morrison had textured each petal to catch light, where he had shaped thorns with geometric precision. It was beautiful and strange and utterly unique. Thank you, she whispered. They stood there in the warm forge while the fire crackled and outside the December wind howled against the walls. And for the first time since their wedding, Morrison reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind Kate's ear. His calloused fingers were gentle against her skin. I am glad the coach left you in that blizzard, he said quietly. I am glad it was me who found you. Kate's breath caught. So am I. Morrison's hand slid from her hair to cup her cheek. His thumb brushed along her cheekbone, and Kate felt electricity run through her entire body. Then he leaned down and kissed her. Not the careful, chaste kiss from their wedding. This was deeper, longer, full of everything they had not said to each other. When they finally parted, they were both breathing hard. "The cabin is warmer than the forge," Kate said softly. "Let me finish this last rose, then I will come to bed." Kate carried her iron rose back to the cabin, clutching it like a talisman. She changed into her nightgown and climbed under the quilts, but she did not sleep. She waited. When Morrison finally came to bed an hour later, he pulled her close without hesitation. And for the first time since their marriage, they were truly husband and wife in every sense. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Morrison's arm around her and her iron rose on the table beside them, Kate felt something she had not felt since her father died. She felt home. On the morning of December 30th, Kate and Morrison rode to Pemberton's bank with saddlebags heavy with currency. The whole town seemed to turn out to watch. People lined the street, their faces anxious. Everything depended on the next hour. Inside the bank, Pemberton sat behind his desk like a judge at sentencing. His expression revealed nothing as Morrison and Kate approached. "Do you have what you owe?" Kate set the saddlebags on his desk and began removing money. Coins and bills, all carefully counted and bundled. She laid them out in neat stacks while Pemberton watched. $73 from Forge savings, $180 from town pledges, $90 from Iron Rose sales, $7 from my personal funds. She laid down the final stack and met Pemberton's eyes. $350, exactly as agreed. Pemberton counted every coin and bill with excruciating slowness. The only sound in the bank was the clink of metal and rustle of paper. Finally he sat back, paid in full. A cheer erupted from outside where the crowd had been listening through the open door. Kate felt Morrison's hand find hers under the desk, squeezing tight. Pemberton pulled out a document and wrote across it in bold letters, "Paid." Then he stamped it with his bank seal and handed it to Morrison. "The forge is clear. Do not make me regret this leniency, Morrison." As they walked out of the bank into bright winter sunshine, the crowd surrounded them. Ruth Cooper embraced Kate. Thomas Crane shook Morrison's hand. Samuel Garrett actually smiled. That evening there was a celebration at the church. Someone brought a fiddle. Clara Hayes produced a bottle of whiskey that had been hidden for special occasions. The mood was jubilant, almost giddy with relief. But as Kate stood watching the festivities, Morrison pulled her aside. "Walk with me." They left the noise behind and walked through the quiet streets. Their breath misted in the cold air. Stars wheeled overhead in their winter constellations. Morrison stopped in front of his forge. The building stood solid and permanent, glowing with forge light through the windows. He turned to Kate. "I have something for you." He pulled a small object from his pocket. Another iron rose, but this one was different. The petals had been etched with intricate patterns, and on the stem, carefully engraved, were their names and the date. Catherine and Nathaniel, December 1883. Morrison went down on one knee in the snow. "Kate, we married because circumstances forced us together. You needed safety. I needed help. But I do not want that to be our story anymore. I want you to choose me again. Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to be here, because you want this life we are building together." Kate felt tears start to freeze on her cheeks. Morrison continued, his voice rough with emotion. "You showed me that numbers do not tell the whole story. There are things that cannot be calculated. The courage it took you to come here. The kindness you have shown to people who are strangers to you. The way you look at me like I am still a man worth loving, not just a ghost of who I used to be. This rose will never wilt, and neither will what I feel for you." Kate dropped to her knees in the snow beside him. "I choose you, today and tomorrow and every day after. I choose this life. I choose us." They kissed there in the street, in the cold December night while the celebration continued in the church behind them. And Kate knew that this was not the end of their struggles. There would be more challenges, more hardships, more moments when they would have to fight for survival, but they would face them together. Equal partners in a life they were building from iron and numbers and something that could not be calculated or quantified. Something called love. Spring came to Silverstone with a violence that surprised Kate. The snow that had seemed permanent melted in rushing torrents. Creeks that had been frozen solid became roaring streams overnight. The mountains shed their white blankets to reveal gray stone beneath, and the valley floor turned green almost as she watched. By April, Kate knew she was pregnant. She stood in the doorway of the forge watching Morrison work, one hand pressed unconsciously to her still flat belly. She had missed her monthly courses twice now. Her breasts were tender. And in the mornings, the smell of coffee made her stomach turn in ways it never had before. Morrison looked up from the plow blade he was repairing and saw something in her expression. He set down his hammer immediately. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong." Kate moved into the forge, closer to the warmth of the fire and the man she had come to love. "I am with child." Morrison went completely still. For a moment Kate could not read his expression. Then he crossed the space between them in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off the ground in an embrace so fierce it drove the breath from her lungs. When he set her down, she saw tears on his face. "A baby," he whispered. "Kate, we are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" He laughed through his tears. Happy does not begin to describe it. Terrified. Overwhelmed. But yes, incredibly happy. Over the following weeks, Morrison became insufferably protective. He refused to let Kate lift anything heavier than a teacup. He insisted she rest in the afternoons. He worried constantly about her eating enough, sleeping enough, working too hard. Kate tolerated his concern with a mixture of amusement and frustration. "I am pregnant, not dying," she told him one morning when he tried to prevent her from walking to the general store. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. Not my wife, not my child, not my—" The possessiveness in his voice made something warm bloom in Kate's chest. She reached up and kissed him. "I will be careful. I promise." Ruth Cooper became an unexpected source of wisdom. She had raised 5 children of her own and had helped deliver dozens more over her years in Silverstone. She taught Kate which herbs helped with morning sickness and how to recognize the signs of problems. "You will want to stop the bookkeeping work in the last month," Ruth advised over tea one afternoon. "The baby will be sitting on your lungs and you will barely be able to breathe, much less add columns of figures." But Kate continued working longer than that. The Iron Rose project had sparked something in Silverstone. The town had remembered that survival required cooperation, not isolation. Samuel Garrett's general store began stocking goods on credit for families who pledged future payment. Thomas Crane organized a shared cattle drive to Denver that benefited all the ranchers. The town was not thriving, but it was no longer dying. And Kate's bookkeeping skills had become essential to managing these cooperative ventures. She kept ledgers for the general store, tracked shared expenses for the cattle operation, and helped families plan their finances. She worked at a desk Morrison had built for her in the corner of the cabin, her father's ledger always within reach. By summer, her belly had grown round and undeniable. She could no longer ride Willow. Walking from the cabin to the forge left her breathless, but still she worked, determined to be useful even as her body changed in ways that frightened and amazed her. One evening in August, Morrison came in from the forge to find Kate asleep at her desk, her head pillowed on her arms beside an unfinished column of figures. He lifted her gently and carried her to their bed. She woke briefly as he settled her against the pillows. "I was not finished with the accounts," she murmured. "They can wait until tomorrow. You need rest." Kate reached up and touched his face. His beard had grown longer over the summer, and there were new lines around his eyes. lines that came from smiling, not grief. "You work too hard," says the woman who fell asleep at her desk while 7 months pregnant. Kate laughed softly. "We make quite a pair, do not we?" Morrison kissed her forehead. "The best pair I can imagine." In September, 5 families moved back to Silverstone. Word had spread that the town was recovering, that there was work to be had and a community worth joining. The school reopened with 15 children. Reverend Lucas performed 3 weddings in as many weeks. And on November 15th, in the middle of a snowstorm that reminded Kate terribly of her arrival almost a year ago, her labor began. The pain woke her just after midnight. It started as a tightening across her belly, uncomfortable but bearable. She lay in the darkness beside Morrison, counting the minutes between contractions. When they came consistently every 10 minutes, she reached over and shook his shoulder. "Nathaniel, it is time." He was awake instantly. "Time? You mean the baby?" "I mean the baby." Morrison leaped from the bed and began pulling on clothes with shaking hands. "I will get Ruth. And Clara, do not move. Just stay right there." Kate would have laughed if another contraction had not seized her at that moment. She gripped the edge of the mattress and breathed through it, remembering Ruth's instructions. "Do not fight the pain. Breathe into it. Let your body do what it knows how to do." Morrison raced out into the storm. Kate could hear Willow's hooves pounding through snow, then fading into the distance. She was alone. For the first time since learning she was pregnant, Kate allowed herself to be truly afraid. Women died in childbirth. Her own mother had survived Kate's birth only to die of fever 6 weeks later after delivering a stillborn son when Kate was 16. She knew the risks. She had read them in medical texts, heard them in stories Ruth told carefully when she thought Kate was not listening. Another contraction came, harder this time. Kate pulled herself out of bed and began pacing the cabin, one hand pressed to the small of her back. Movement helped, standing helped. Lying still made everything worse. Morrison returned with Ruth and Clara Hayes within the hour. Both women came through the door, bringing efficiency and calm. Ruth took one look at Kate pacing in her nightgown and nodded approval. "Good. You have the right instinct. Keep moving as long as you can." Clara had brought supplies in a canvas bag: clean linens, string for tying the cord, a knife that had been boiled clean. She set up a work area on the table with practiced movements while Ruth examined Kate. "The baby is positioned well. You have hours yet, probably until morning. This is your first, so it will take time." Morrison hovered in the doorway, looking pale and terrified. Ruth pointed at him firmly. "Make yourself useful. Keep the fire going. Boil water. And stay out of the way unless we need you. I want to stay with her. This is women's work, Nathaniel. Best you let us handle it." But Kate reached out her hand. "No. I want him here." Ruth's stern expression softened. She looked between Kate and Morrison and seemed to see something that changed her mind. "All right then. But if you faint, I am dragging you out by your boots." Morrison crossed to Kate and took her hand. His palm was warm and solid against hers. "I am here. I am not going anywhere." The hours that followed blurred together into a landscape of pain unlike anything Kate had ever experienced. The contractions came harder and closer together until there seemed to be no space between them at all. She paced until her legs would no longer hold her. She knelt beside the bed, gripping the mattress until her knuckles went white. She tried every position Ruth suggested, seeking some arrangement of her body that would make the pain manageable. Nothing helped. Through it all, Morrison stayed beside her. He held her hand until his fingers went numb. He supported her weight when she needed to stand. He wiped her face with cool cloths when fever made her burn. He never flinched, never complained, never suggested he leave. Dawn came, and the baby had not. Kate was exhausted beyond anything she had imagined possible. The contractions were constant now, but nothing was happening. The baby was not moving. Ruth examined her again, and Kate saw concern flash across the older woman's face. "The baby is turned wrong. Not breech exactly, but the head is tilted. It is stuck." "What does that mean?" Morrison asked, his voice tight with fear. "It means I need to turn it." Ruth looked at Kate. "This is going to hurt more than anything so far. I need you to stay as still as you can." Kate nodded, too exhausted to speak. She gripped Morrison's hands as Ruth reached inside her body and began to manipulate the baby's position. The pain was blinding. Absolute. Kate heard herself scream and could not stop. "Almost there," Ruth said, her voice steady, despite the blood on her hands. "One more adjustment. There." Kate felt something shift inside her. Then suddenly, impossibly, her body took over. She felt the overwhelming urge to push. "That is it," Ruth said. "Now we can work with this. When the next contraction comes, push as hard as you can." Kate pushed, and pushed, and pushed until she thought she would split apart from the effort. The world narrowed to nothing but the imperative to push, to bring this baby into the world no matter what it cost. Morrison never let go of her hands. His voice was a constant presence. "You can do this. You are the strongest person I know. Just a little more. Stay with me." Time lost meaning. There was only pain and effort, and Morrison's voice anchoring her to consciousness. Then, just when Kate thought she could not possibly continue, she felt something give way. A baby's cry filled the cabin. The sound cut through Kate's exhaustion like light through darkness. Ruth lifted a tiny blood-covered infant and laid it on Kate's chest. The baby's cry was furious and healthy and absolutely beautiful. "A girl," Ruth said, her weathered face breaking into a smile. "You have a daughter." Kate looked down at the tiny life against her chest and felt something in her heart crack open. The baby had dark hair plastered to her skull. Her eyes, when they opened, were the deep blue of Morrison's. Her fingers were impossibly small, curling and uncurling with automatic precision. Morrison was crying openly now, his face pressed against Kate's shoulder as he looked at their daughter. "She is perfect, Kate. She is perfect." "What will you name her?" Clara asked. Kate looked up at Morrison. "She should carry Anna's name. Your first wife should be remembered." Morrison's expression crumpled. He kissed Kate's temple, then reached out with one finger to touch the baby's impossibly soft cheek. "Anna Ruth. For both of the women who taught me about love." The baby, as if recognizing her name, wrapped her tiny hand around Morrison's finger and held on tight. The weeks that followed were perhaps the hardest of Kate's life. She had survived blizzards and near starvation and labor that nearly killed her. But nothing had prepared her for the relentless exhaustion of caring for a newborn. Anna Ruth did not sleep for more than 2 hours at a time. She nursed constantly, leaving Kate's body feeling drained and hollow. The winter cold meant keeping the fire going at all hours, washing diapers in freezing water, trying to find moments to sleep while the baby slept, and failing because there was always something else that needed doing. Morrison helped in every way he could. He walked the floor with Anna when she cried inconsolably. He changed her diapers without complaint. He brought Kate food and water and reminded her to eat when she was too tired to remember on her own, but he could not nurse the baby. That fell entirely to Kate. And some nights, sitting in the darkness with Anna at her breast and her body aching with exhaustion, Kate wondered if she had made a terrible mistake coming to Colorado, if she had condemned herself and her daughter to a life of hardship that would break them both. Then Morrison would wake without being asked, would come to sit beside her in the darkness, would put his arm around her shoulders and just be there. And Kate would remember that she was not doing this alone. By spring, life had found a new rhythm. Anna grew from a helpless infant into a baby who could hold her head up, who smiled at the sound of her parents' voices, who grabbed at everything within reach with determined little hands. And Kate discovered that she was pregnant again. She told Morrison on a warm May evening as they sat on the porch watching Anna play on a blanket at their feet. The baby was nearly 6 months old now, healthy and thriving despite the harsh winter. Morrison looked at her with concern. "So soon? Are you all right?" "I am tired," Kate admitted. "But yes, I am all right. Apparently we are very good at making babies." Morrison laughed, but the sound was tinged with worry. 2 children under 2 years old. That will be a challenge. It will. But we will manage. We always do. The second pregnancy was easier than the first in some ways, harder in others. Kate knew what to expect now. Her body remembered the changes. But caring for Anna while pregnant left her constantly exhausted. There were days when she could barely lift her growing daughter, when the simple act of walking from the cabin to the outhouse felt like climbing a mountain. Morrison tried to take over more of Anna's care, but he had the forge to run. The demand for his metalwork had grown as Silverstone recovered. He was shoeing horses, repairing equipment, crafting tools and hinges, and all the metal necessities of frontier life. Some weeks he worked 16-hour days just to keep up. Ruth Cooper became a lifeline. She would arrive at the cabin without being asked, scoop up Anna, and give Kate a few hours to rest, or work on her bookkeeping, or simply sit in silence. She never made Kate feel like a burden, never suggested that asking for help was weakness. "You cannot do everything alone," Ruth told her one afternoon while Anna napped. "None of us can. That is what community means." In October, Kate gave birth to twins. The labor came fast, much faster than with Anna. Morrison barely had time to fetch Ruth before Kate was pushing. The first baby, a boy, slipped into the world with relative ease. But then Ruth's expression changed. "There is another one." "Kate, there is another baby?" "What?" "Twins. You are having twins." The second baby, another boy, was smaller than his brother and came into the world silent. For one terrible moment, Kate thought they had lost him. Then Ruth turned him upside down and patted his back sharply. The baby coughed, sputtered, and finally cried. "2 boys," Ruth announced, laying both infants on Kate's chest. "You have yourself quite a family now, Mrs. Morrison." Kate looked down at the 2 tiny faces and felt tears stream down her cheeks. Not from pain, though her body hurt in ways that would take weeks to heal, but from the overwhelming reality of what had just happened. 3 children. She had 3 children now. Morrison knelt beside the bed, his hand shaking as he touched each baby's head in turn. "What will we name them?" The bigger twin they named William, for Kate's father. The smaller one, who had fought so hard to take his first breath, they named Samuel after the storekeeper who had been one of the first to believe in their cooperative vision. Life with 3 children under 2 years old was chaos in its purest form. The cabin that had seemed spacious when Kate first arrived now felt impossibly cramped. There was never a moment of silence, never a full night's sleep, never enough hands to do everything that needed doing. Kate's bookkeeping work fell away almost entirely. She simply did not have time. Morrison hired a young man named Jack to help at the forge so he could spend more time with the family. Ruth seemed to practically live at their cabin those first few months, and slowly, impossibly, they found their rhythm. Anna became a remarkably capable older sister. At not quite 2 years old, she would fetch diapers when asked and make funny faces to soothe her crying brothers. The twins developed distinct personalities early. William was loud and demanding, letting the world know immediately when he was unhappy. Samuel was quieter, more watchful, content to observe before joining in. One evening, when the twins were 4 months old, Morrison came in from the forge to find Kate sitting at the table with her father's ledger open before her. It was the first time in months she had looked at it. "What are you doing?" he asked gently. Kate traced her finger over the neat columns her father had taught her to create. "Remembering. This ledger was the only thing I had left of him when I came here. I thought it represented everything I had lost. But now I think maybe it represents what I found." Morrison sat down beside her. "What did you find?" Kate looked around the cabin. At Anna playing quietly with a wooden horse Morrison had carved for her. At the twins sleeping in the cradle Morrison had built. At the home they had created together through determination and cooperation and love. I found that numbers only tell part of the story. My father taught me to read ledgers, to see truth in mathematics. But he never taught me that some things cannot be calculated. The value of a man who runs into a blizzard to save a stranger. The worth of a community that stands together when times are hard. The price of love freely given. Morrison took her hand. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was, but even he did not know everything. Kate closed the ledger gently. I wish he could have known you, could have seen this life we built. Maybe he does know. Maybe he is watching from wherever good fathers go when they leave this world, and maybe he is proud of you. Kate leaned her head against Morrison's shoulder. I hope so. The years that followed brought both joy and sorrow. In the spring of 1887, Kate became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy felt different from the start. Something was wrong, though she could not name what. She was tired beyond exhaustion. She bled slightly in the 4th month, and the baby's movements, when they finally came, were weak and irregular. She gave birth in late November to a daughter who lived only 3 days. They named her Grace and buried her in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking Silverstone. The tiny coffin Morrison built was hardly bigger than a shoebox. Grace had been so small, so fragile, born weeks too early with lungs that could not quite manage the work of breathing. Kate stood at the graveside with Morrison on one side and Ruth on the other, Anna clinging to her skirts, and the twins mercifully too young to understand. Reverend Lucas spoke words that Kate did not hear. She was somewhere far away, locked in a place of grief too deep for tears. That night Morrison held her while she finally broke. The sobs came from somewhere primal, a place of loss that had no words. She cried for Grace, for the daughter who would never grow up. She cried for Morrison, who had now buried a wife and son and daughter in this Colorado soil. She cried for Anna and the twins, who would never know their sister. And she cried for herself, for the belief she had held that if you just worked hard enough, if you were smart enough and careful enough and tried hard enough, you could protect the people you loved from harm. Grace's death taught her that some things could not be calculated away. Some losses had to simply be endured. Slowly, with Morrison's steady presence and the demands of 3 living children, Kate found her way back from that dark place. They planted a tree over Grace's grave, an aspen that would grow tall and strong and would turn gold every autumn as a reminder of the brief, bright life they had been given. Life continued because it had to. Anna grew into a serious, intelligent child who loved books as much as Kate had at her age. William was all energy and noise, always running, always building, always demanding more of everything. Samuel remained quiet and observant, content to watch the world rather than conquer it. By 1890, Silverstone had transformed. The town that had been dying when Kate arrived now had 60 families and growing, a proper school, a doctor who visited monthly, even talk of bringing a railroad spur from Denver. And Morrison's forge had become the center of it all. His iron roses were now famous throughout Colorado. Orders came from as far away as San Francisco, but he still took time to shoe horses for local ranchers and repair plows for farmers who paid in goods rather than cash. Kate managed the business side of the forge, keeping books that would have made her father proud. She tracked inventory and accounts receivable and expenses with the same precision she had brought to untangling the town's debts 7 years earlier. She had become, without quite intending it, one of the most respected businesswomen in the territory. In 1895, the town council asked Kate to serve as treasurer. It was an unprecedented appointment. Women could not vote in Colorado, though that would change a year later. But the council recognized that Kate's financial expertise was more valuable than outdated ideas about gender. She accepted the position and brought the same methodical analysis to town finances that she had brought to everything else. Within 2 years, Silverstone had paid off its debts and started a fund for public improvements. Through it all, Morrison remained her steadfast partner. They had learned the rhythm of each other over the years, how to move around each other in the small cabin without collision, how to communicate with looks when words were not possible, how to support each other through challenges that would have broken lesser partnerships. They had argued, of course, about money and children and how much time Morrison spent at the forge, about Kate working too hard when she should rest, about Anna's education and William's recklessness and Samuel's increasing tendency to disappear into books rather than engage with the world. But they had never stopped being partners, never stopped choosing each other every day, just as Morrison had asked her to do that December night in the snow outside his forge. On their 10th anniversary, Morrison took Kate back to the spot where they had been married. The church was unchanged, still simple and white and welcoming. But everything else was different. They had 3 living children now, a thriving business, a community that had become more than just neighbors, but something closer to family. Morrison held both of Kate's hands and looked into her eyes. 10 years ago, I asked you to choose me, not out of desperation, but out of love. You did, and every day since has been better than the one before because you were in it. Kate felt tears sting her eyes. Happy tears this time, not born of grief, but of gratitude. You gave me a life I never imagined, a home I never thought I would find. You taught me that numbers are important, but they are not everything. Morrison pulled her close. I love you, Catherine Morrison, more today than yesterday, less than I will tomorrow. They kissed there in the churchyard, older now and marked by years of hard work and harder losses, but still together, still choosing each other. Time moved forward as it always does, neither slowing for joy nor pausing for sorrow. The children grew. Anna at 17 was already helping Kate with the town books, showing the same aptitude for numbers her mother possessed. William at 15 was learning the forge from his father, his strong arms and endless energy, perfect for the demanding work. Samuel at 15 preferred books to metal, spending hours reading everything he could find. Morrison's hair had gone completely silver by the time he turned 60. The lines around his eyes had deepened into permanent creases. His hands, still strong and capable, showed the accumulated damage of 30 years working with fire and metal. But he had never stopped creating beauty. The iron roses he forged at 60 were even more exquisite than those he had made at 30. Kate, at 48, found that her body no longer cooperated the way it once had. Her joints ached on cold mornings. Her eyes strained over ledgers until she finally admitted defeat and got spectacles from the traveling doctor. Her hair, once dark brown, was streaked with silver, but her mind remained sharp. She could still see patterns in numbers that others missed, could still solve problems through careful analysis and creative thinking. The skills her father had taught her 40 years ago remained her most valuable possession. In 1907, Anna married Thomas Crane's son and moved to his ranch 10 miles from Silverstone. The wedding was the social event of the year. 70 people attended. Morrison walked his daughter down the aisle with tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered face. Kate watched from the front pew and thought about the terrified young woman who had stepped off a mail coach into a blizzard 24 years ago. That woman could never have imagined this moment, this family, this life. That night, alone in their cabin for the first time in years, with all the children grown and gone, Morrison pulled Kate close. Just us again, he said quietly. Just us, Kate agreed, as it was in the beginning. They lay together in the darkness, holding hands the way they had that first night after their wedding. And Kate thought that perhaps this was what love truly meant, not the passionate urgency of youth, though they had certainly had that. Not even the partnership they had forged through crisis and cooperation, though that had been essential. Love was this: two people choosing to lie together in darkness after decades of life had worn away everything except what mattered most, the simple, profound comfort of not being alone. Morrison's health began to fail in 1910. It started small, a cough that would not go away, fatigue that seemed deeper than simple tiredness, pain in his chest that he tried to hide but Kate noticed anyway. The doctor, when he finally examined Morrison, confirmed what Kate had feared. His lungs were damaged from 35 years of breathing forge smoke and metal dust. There was no cure, no treatment that would reverse the damage. Only time until his body could no longer sustain the work of breathing. Morrison took the news with characteristic stoicism. How long? The doctor hedged. A year? Maybe 2. Difficult to say. That evening, Kate found Morrison in the forge, staring at the banked fire. She came to stand beside him, taking his hand in hers. "I am not afraid of dying," he said quietly. "I have lived a good life, better than I deserved, but I am afraid of leaving you." Kate squeezed his hand. "Then do not leave yet. We still have time." And they did have time. Morrison worked the forge for another year, though Kate insisted he hire help for the heavy work. He taught William everything he knew about metalworking, passing down skills and techniques that represented a lifetime of mastery. He spent evenings with Kate on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. They talked about everything and nothing, about their children and grandchildren, about the town they had helped save, about the blizzard that had brought them together and the choices they had made afterward. In the spring of 1911, Morrison became too weak to work the forge. He spent his days in a chair by the window, wrapped in blankets despite the warmth, watching the world he had helped build. Kate sat beside him, reading aloud from books they both loved. Sometimes Anna came with the grandchildren. Sometimes William brought metalwork from the forge for his father's opinion. Samuel, who had become a teacher in Denver, came home as often as he could. On a quiet afternoon in June, with Kate holding his hand and late sunlight streaming through the window, Morrison took his last breath. It was peaceful, as gentle as a man who had lived through violence and loss and hard work deserved. Kate sat with him for a long time after, memorizing his face one final time. The silver hair, the weathered skin, the calloused hands that had saved her life in a blizzard and built a family from nothing. Finally, she leaned down and kissed his forehead. "Thank you," she whispered, "for waiting for me, for finding me in the storm, for giving me a life worth living." They buried Morrison beside Grace in the cemetery on the hill. The entire town attended. More than 200 people came to pay respects to the man who had been Silverstone's blacksmith for 35 years. At the graveside, William spoke for the family. His voice was rough with grief but steady with purpose. "My father saved this town twice. Once with his forge, giving people the tools they needed to survive, and once with his heart, showing us that cooperation and community mattered more than individual success. He was a good man, the best man, and we will honor his memory by living the way he taught us to live." After the funeral, people approached Kate with condolences and memories, but the one that struck her most deeply came from Ruth Cooper, now in her 80s and still sharp as ever. Ruth took Kate's hands and looked into her eyes. "You know what he told me once? Years ago, maybe the second or third winter you were here. He said choosing to marry you was the best decision he ever made. That you did not just save his forge, you saved his life." Kate's throat tightened. "He saved mine first. You saved each other. That is how the best partnerships work." The months after Morrison's death were the hardest of Kate's life, harder even than Grace's death, because this loss was so complete. Morrison had been her partner for nearly 30 years. He had been woven into every part of her life. His absence was a constant ache, a wound that did not heal. But Kate had learned over the years that grief, however profound, did not excuse her from living. She had children who needed her, grandchildren who asked questions about the grandfather they would barely remember. A town that still relied on her financial expertise. So she continued. She kept the books for the forge that William now ran. She served as town treasurer, a position she had held for 16 years. She taught Anna's daughter the basics of bookkeeping, passing down the skills her own father had taught her. And slowly, so slowly she barely noticed it happening, the grief transformed. Not into acceptance, exactly. Morrison's loss would never be acceptable, but into something she could carry. A weight that became part of her, no longer crushing, but simply present. She lived 7 more years after Morrison died. 7 years of watching grandchildren grow and great-grandchildren be born. 7 years of keeping order in ledgers and helping neighbors navigate financial challenges. 7 years of holding on to the life they had built together, even though he was no longer there to share it. On December 19, 1918, exactly 35 years to the day after Morrison had pulled her from a blizzard, Kate died peacefully in her sleep. Anna found her the next morning, still in bed, her father's silver ring on her finger and an iron rose on the table beside her. On her lap was the old leather ledger that had belonged to Kate's father, open to the first page where, decades ago, she had written the neat columns that saved Morrison's forge. They buried Kate beside Morrison in the cemetery on the hill. The entire town attended again, though Silverstone was much larger now, with nearly 500 residents. Anna spoke at the graveside, her voice breaking but proud. "My mother came to this town with nothing. Just $2.50 and a book of numbers. She was scared and alone and desperate, but she was also brilliant and brave and determined. She taught us that problems could be solved if you were willing to work hard and think clearly. That community mattered more than individual success. That love was a choice you made every day, not just once." She paused, looking out at the assembled crowd. "My father always said he was the lucky one, that finding my mother in that blizzard was the best thing that ever happened to him. But we were all lucky. This whole town was lucky. Because Catherine Morrison showed us what it meant to truly care about each other's success. Years turned into decades." The Morrison Forge continued, passed down through generations. William's son ran it, then his grandson. The iron roses became collector's items, valuable not just for their beauty, but for the story they represented. The cabin where Kate and Morrison had lived became a museum in the 1950s, preserved exactly as it had been, with Morrison's tools still hanging on the walls and Kate's desk still in the corner. In a glass case in the main room sat 3 items: a leather ledger with careful columns of figures, a silver ring worn thin by decades of wear, and an iron rose with 2 names engraved on its stem: Catherine and Nathaniel. December 1883. Above the case, a plaque told their story in brief: how a mail coach had abandoned a desperate woman in a blizzard, how a lonely blacksmith had saved her, how together they had saved a dying town and built a legacy that lasted generations. But the real story, the one that could not be captured in museum displays or bronze plaques, lived on in different ways. In the Morrison descendants who still lived in Silverstone, in the cooperative spirit that continued to define the town's culture, in the understanding passed down through families that the hardest times required people to stand together rather than apart. In 2020, a young woman named Catherine Morrison, great-great-great-great-granddaughter of the original Kate, stood in the museum looking at her ancestors' ledger. She was 24 years old, the same age Kate had been when she arrived in Silverstone. She had just lost her job in the pandemic and was facing an uncertain future. She stared at the neat columns of figures, at the evidence of problems solved through careful analysis and determination, at the iron rose that represented love and permanence, at the silver ring that had circled Kate's finger for 35 years. And she thought about the story she had heard since childhood, about the woman who came to Colorado with nothing and built everything, about the man who ran into a blizzard to save a stranger and found a wife, about two people who chose each other every day and created something that lasted long after they were gone. The museum curator, an elderly man who had run the place for 40 years, came to stand beside her. "Are you all right, miss?" Catherine wiped her eyes. "Yes, just thinking about what it must have been like to be her, to face what she faced." The curator smiled. "Your great-great-great-grandmother was remarkable, but so were many people in her time. What made her special was not just her intelligence or her courage. It was her willingness to see problems as solvable, to believe that cooperation could succeed where individual effort failed." He gestured at the ledger. "Numbers never lie," that is what her father taught her. But she learned something her father never knew, that numbers only tell part of the story, that some things cannot be calculated. Love, community, the decision to keep trying when all logic says to give up. Catherine looked at him. "Do you think that lesson still applies? Today, I mean. Not in 1883. The old man's eyes crinkled. "I think human nature does not change as much as we believe it does. We face different challenges now, different technologies, different threats. But the fundamental question remains the same. Do we face them alone or together? Do we give up when things are hard, or do we keep trying? Do we see others as competitors or as potential partners?" He patted her shoulder gently. "Your ancestor answered those questions in a way that built something lasting. You carry her blood, her intelligence. Maybe you carry her wisdom too." After he left, Catherine stood alone in the museum for a long time. Outside, the world was struggling through a pandemic, through economic uncertainty, through divisions that seemed impossible to bridge. It felt, in many ways, like Silverstone in 1883 must have felt, like everything was falling apart and there was no clear path forward. But Kate had found a path, not because she was superhuman or lucky, but because she had looked at an impossible problem and refused to accept that it was unsolvable. She had used the skills she possessed, had asked for help when she needed it, and had chosen to trust in partnership rather than isolation. Catherine pulled out her phone and began making notes. She had an idea. It was risky and would require convincing a lot of people to work together. But maybe, just maybe, it could work. After all, she thought as she looked one more time at her ancestor's ledger, numbers never lie. But they also are not everything. Sometimes you have to calculate the odds and then bet on them anyway. She walked out of the museum into the bright Colorado sunshine, carrying with her the legacy of a woman she had never met, but who had shaped her life in ways both tangible and mysterious. And somewhere on a hill overlooking Silverstone, beneath an aspen tree that turned gold every autumn, two weathered headstones stood side by side. Catherine Morrison, 1859 to 1918. Nathaniel Morrison, 1851 to 1911. Between them, carved into a single shared stone, were the words that summarized everything they had built together. She brought the numbers. He brought the fire. Together they built forever. The wind whispered through the aspen leaves, a sound like distant applause. And if you believed in such things, you might imagine two spirits standing together in that high mountain cemetery, holding hands the way they had in life, watching their legacy continue to unfold in the lives of those who came after. But that is a story beyond numbers, beyond calculation, a story that can only be measured in love and time and the choices people make when faced with impossible odds. And it is a story that, like the iron roses that inspired it, will never fade or wilt or die. Because some things, once properly forged, last forever.